comes down to a fight between you and me, then you are doomed to lose. Keep the red flag flying here.
Evening, everyone. As you can see, I'm not Paul. I'm not Laura Daly. I'm Vonni, and they've let me go a bit mad tonight, which is really cool. I'm here with some fantastic people to talk about trans rights, which I think is quite apt after the Reclaim Pride March in London today. Northern Pride, which has been online all day, and tomorrow's Northern Pride continues, and also Durham Pride next week. So for those of us who are in the Northeast, which I think is just me on our panel tonight, it's quite locally quite important for Pride this week. I'm absolutely delighted with the panel that we've got. And, you know, for a start, we've got my good friend Kacey from the same union as me. We've got Laura Miles and we've got Keyne. I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about themselves. But if you've got any questions or comments or anything, please do let us know. I am trying to keep an eye on it as well, on the comments. So please do post any comments on whatever platform you're watching, and do remember to share, and like. Let's go. Let's see how many people we can accidentally get watching this tonight. Okay, I'm going to start with Kacey, simply because I know Kacey and simply because I know how awesome Kacey is. Okay, so Kacey, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna start by saying I'm not feeling that awesome, like in lots of ways, because I'm just I was diagnosed positive COVID a few days ago. I feel like I'm through the worst of it. So who am I? I'm the LGBT plus executive seat holder for the National Education Union, and I guess one of the things that brought me to the union was me transitioning. It was a real worry that I had, that when I transitioned in school, I'm a drama teacher in a secondary school, and I was super worried that it was going to be a nightmare and I would really need the union to have my back. So that was what got me more involved locally with the union. And actually there was amazing support and solidarity there. There was brilliant resources already in place with the union through the work of LGBT plus members before me. So actually I kind of needn't have worried, but that has brought me to activism, really. And I think the trans question, as a trans woman, the transphobia within the union, within society, has just gone so much at a pace since the point of my transition about 4 years ago. Like everything in the run up to the transition, everything felt like it was getting better, and then it's all turned to shit again. We're allowed to swear, aren't we? I think it's positively encouraged, Vonni, isn't it?
Yeah, swear as much as you like.
Yeah, so that's basically me, really.
Brilliant. Who would like to go next? Shall we go to Laura? Just simply because you're next on my screen. So Laura, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, thanks, Vonni, and thanks for the invitation. Great to be on the same platform as Kacey and Keyne, and I hope Kacey's recovery goes apace, because it is bloody horrible being diagnosed. Okay, so yeah, I'm Laura Miles. I'm also in an education union, but a different union. I'm a member of UCU. I'm actually retired now, but I was one of the two LGBT plus reps on the national executive for a number of years before I retired, and worked with the LGBT support standing committee. I chaired that committee, and I also chaired the union's equality committee for a period as well. So my main kind of work, I suppose, has been in the labour movement, and particularly around kind of education. And I worked in further education, but teaching higher education at a Bradford College. It's a slightly odd situation, so I had a foot in both camps, really. A bit like Kacey, I transitioned, gosh, it must be 12 or 13 years ago now, and with some trepidation. So I went away in July as one person and came back in September as Laura. But actually, apart from one or two hiccups, I found, the college, because I was kind of guiding them, to be honest, it was okay, and it was certainly okay with the students, and obviously it was fine within the union as well. I had nothing but support really from the union, and again, like Kacey, I think unfortunately, things have escalatedly, in an escalating way, got worse, much worse actually, over the past 3, 4, 5 years. Since I've retired, I've been doing quite a lot of writing and speaking. I wrote Transgender Resistance, which is this book here, available from bookmarks and other booksellers, I suppose. And that was specifically around really sort of talking about a socialist response to what's happening, and a socialist response to how we protect trans lives and we defend trans rights, and how we fight for liberation, specifically about liberation, because I would argue that it's not possible to win liberation within a capitalist society. We have to transform the society, as with any other form of oppression. So the book was very much about kind of the history of trans resistance and current trans resistance around the world, and how we develop that and take that forward, and how we come up with a kind of Marxist understanding really of oppression in general, but trans LGBT oppression in particular. So that's kind of me, really.
Oh, brilliant. That sounds great. And I'll be honest, I haven't read your book yet, but it's definitely on my list of to buys. But there's so many books on my list of to buys, you would think it was some holidays or something. Okay, Keyne, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, absolutely. First, thanks for having me on. It's an honour to share the stage with everyone here, but more importantly, it's lovely. My name is Keyne. I'm a professional climate campaigner. I'm an amateur gender freedom activist, and I am a full-time queer hot mess. My pronouns are they, them. The bit that's got me here today, I'm part of Transsexual UK's legislative review panel, where I've been mostly focusing on hate crime law, healthcare ethics, and non-binary legal recognition. A lot of the work is also just monitoring and responding to the anti-trans moral panic that we are all unfortunately living through. So there's a lot of defensive posture, unfortunately, in trans activism at the moment. As for the rest of me, I work mostly on the technical aspects of climate change and the intersecting ecological crises that humanity is facing. But I look at the technical aspects, I look at the practical aspects of what it means to transition to society from in every part of it, from where it is to where it needs to be. So I look especially at the intersection with justice and well-being of communities. I think we're fairly screwed if we can't build international solidarity and intersectional solidarity across communities and take that opportunity of the climate transition to sort of redesign our social and physical worlds. Other than that, I live in a little rented house here in London, where I'm coming to you from now, where I struggle to maintain a garden and my sense of normalcy.
Thank you so much. Wow, I just feel so privileged to be here chairing this, actually, because all three of you do such fantastic things. I know more about Kacey. I do have a couple of questions which are really start off quite general, because I know that our viewers will have questions that they will put in the comments, which I will try and keep up with. So, this is Socialist think tank. And what we try and do is we always try and find out what socialism means to our guests. So just really quickly, and I know it's a massive thing, and I could probably talk for 3 hours on my own about what socialism is to me. I've done it before. Just really quickly, what does socialism mean to you? And I think this time I'll start with Laura, if you've got an answer that you can think of, just because, and then that just gets that bit out of the way for our viewers.
Okay, yeah. Essentially, it's I guess it's a society characterized by production for people's needs and not, for profit. That's the kind of most straightforward definition. We live in a quite a bizarre society, actually, that has fantastic production potential and actuality, but produces enormous amounts of waste and inequality and violence to people's lives, violence to their bodies, and so on. So for me, it's a society that is controlled from below by the working class, which is the vast majority of us, and which does allows the conditions, I suppose, for people to. I mean, we're talking about LGBT sort of lives and needs this evening, I guess, but allows people to express themselves, has respect for their lives, doesn't try and control who we love, who we live with, how we express ourselves gender-wise or any otherwise, as long as we're not doing any harm to anybody else. I think that should be the kind of basis for a sane society, one of genuine democracy.
I couldn't actually agree more, because to me that's kind of sums up what socialism is. It's very similar to what I think socialism is. Let's go to Keyne now, and then I'll go to Kacey last.
Sure. Well, I have a slightly sacrilegious answer on the first, but not the term I tend to use to identify myself, as I'm generally floating around leftism. But I'm more interested in deconstructing categories than in finding one, which probably is deeply rooted in me. But that said, I effectively am doing lots of different bits of socialism in my politics all the time as well. So the way in which I tend to think about socialism is the foremost and the bridge into thinking about an alternative to the systems of power, of production and ways of life, of relating to one another through everything from gender to everything else. A lot of it is hangovers from feudalism, colonialism, and the deeply incorrect, racist, misogynist assumptions that were imbued into early capitalism at that time and have now evolved into the situation we have now, which I don't think anybody would make sense or is really particularly enjoyable, and necessarily some tiny minority that benefits in some way. And I think it's clear at this point that we're having to develop increasingly odd solutions about minority groups to shift the anger and the awareness of what the intense problems are, and give people something to be angry about other than the state of the world and the systems of power which maintain it in that way. Trans people are the current choice for that. Like those of us on the panel, I myself came out around shortly after the transgender tipping point, and slowly transitioned since then. I don't think I'll ever quite be done with that process. It's remarkable to have seen how quickly it's arrived in the UK and globally, and how clearly mechanistic it is as a tool of distraction, how perfectly it fits into our strange capitalist, at the same time deeply moralizing media and government.
Definitely, and I totally pick up on all those points. Just before I bring Kacey in on that answer, it kind of reminds me, I'm a cisgendered lesbian, it's like, but I put off starting my teaching career because of Section 28. And I can see the parallels. There are amazing parallels between what's going on now with transphobia and what went on then with homophobia. To me, it's they're using the same tools and creating that same moral panic you were talking about to kind of drive divisions and drive wedges and keep us all angry at each other, which is ridiculous. But yes,
it Absolutely that. I thought we were having a bit of a 90s moment culturally and in terms of queer rights, so I decided to bring that in my head. Well, that's what this is about, the Section 28 hairstyle.
Yeah. Well, I've had some strange hairstyles through the years. Have been fabulous. At the moment, I have a very boring, normal hairstyle, which isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, but never mind. Kacey, what about you?
Oh, thank you. I just want to say, I mean, I love the idea that you asked Laura to sum up socialism. Laura's written a book about socialism from a trans perspective. And it's like, give us your book, Laura, in a very quick second.
Yeah, in a really 2-minute section.
And I also think Laura did that beautifully, and also Keyne as well. But like, I think for me, socialism is about equality. Like that's at the heart of it. That's what it's about, you know. And I grew up under Thatcher years, and actually, you know, don't know if I should say this out loud, but you know, my parents used to be Tories. my dad died ages ago. He wasn't a Tory when he died either, but that was the kind of, you know, they were capitalist. They were like, you know, oh yeah, make money and be self-employed, and that's what they kind of did. And so I grew up reading the Daily Mail and all of that kind of stuff. And when I went to did A levels, and we had a brilliant economics teacher, Mr. Eady, who was just an absolute legend, and he taught us. We went through the sort of capitalism and the command systems as it was, you know, but those debates that we had, that completely changed my way of thinking about it. But it was down to equality. It was about fairness. It was about saying, how is it fair that a tiny group of people, you know, kind of send their kids to private schools, and then all of this inequality just runs its way through. And that was in a very basic A-level economics lesson. That kind of system, you could see how it's worked. And actually, like, it's completely got so much worse since then. You know, in those days, it was kind of more black and white about Labour and Tory, and you used to get like shifting governments, and you knew who voted and how they voted, and you knew how that all worked. But now, when you end up with kind of, you know, the people who have nothing and have very little possibilities of changing their lives and getting decent jobs are basically, you know, saying, oh, I'll never vote for Jeremy Corbyn, he'll screw the country up. You know, and what element of it? It wasn't the policies. You know, the policy, they'd say, oh, the policies it's going to mess everything. And actually, we've completely lost our way with it all. And I think the inequality that is absolutely everywhere now, and you know, the trans debate is just one side of it, really, which is just so horrendous and totally unequal. Like, it just doesn't work. And you know, I don't know, really. I'm a socialist, and I want things to be fair, and I want things to be equal. But I kind of believe that that's what a lot of people want, really. But so why can't we? I don't know. You know, I feel that's where I am with it. Like, I know how I want it to be, and equality is at the heart of it. I just can't. We should have like an equal chance. We should give help where help is needed. We shouldn't be like, you know, breaking ourselves to work. But, you know, I don't know. I know it's a bit of a wandering worry, really.
Oh, it is. It's one that gets talked about on Socialist Think Tank and on Political Unmuted, which is part of Socialist Think Tank, a lot, about the way that the ruling elite, and I know Paul will probably, if he was on camera, he'd be nodding now, the way that the ruling elite only care about making money for themselves, and we're just there to make that money in this weird version of capitalism that we had, and we're easier to control if we're divided. And that's kind of my way of viewing it.
And there's a comment from Leanne in the chat, which is right. You know, okay, so Jeremy Corbyn wanted a fairer society, that's why he was attacked. But the thing is, I don't understand how people went for it. You know, why do the people that would have benefited from Jeremy Corbyn's policies, why did they listen to all of the attacks? You know, and again, I think this is where we are with the transphobia. Why are people listening to it? Because that's not the experience on the ground. When people meet trans and non-binary people, they're generally, oh wow, that's that's really brave, or, you know, oh, you're brilliant, you know, and that's the experience you have of people. However, when they read all the rubbish that is being put around, that's what they talk about. Sorry.
I completely agree. That's a fascinating topic, is sort of what solutions do people require in order to keep going within the current system without realizing and stepping back and going, oh shit, no one would ever come up with this in a million years if they were actually trying to think of something that would work for people, that would support human well-being, that would support communities, and to do this, that, and the other. I'm always fascinated in the lies that people tell themselves in order to be at the top of the system, all the lies they tell themselves to engage in hunting down the trans community from whatever position in society they are. I think that's reasonably still fair to say. I think there's a lot of lies people tell themselves, and I think it's always interesting to see what transphobia is doing for them in this situation. I think it's doing a lot of different things for a lot of different people. I think that transphobia is very often a rhetorical tool used to break people's attachment to reality, and in doing so force through any bullshit agenda you already have, which is why it gets taken up into all of these different areas. I think it's a tool and it's useful to people, and I don't think that's a conscious choice. I don't think it needs to be. I think they're reacting to the availability of a just about coherent and a conspiratorial, radicalized, have to do a huge sense of suspension of disbelief in order to get there, but it kind of hangs together and it's got the resources and content to radicalize more people. So you can keep using this as a tool. And I think that's what we're mostly seeing, these very convenient delusions that allow us to maintain ourselves.
Do you have anything to add to that, Laura?
Yeah, yes, I'll take those points that Kacey and Keyne are making. I mean, Marx said, didn't he, that the ruling ideas in any epoch are the ideas of the ruling class, and that, I mean, it doesn't mean they're the only ideas or whatever. There are counter ideas as well, but those are the dominant ideas, and it's because the ruling class has at its disposal all sorts of means to propagate an ideology that maintains their power and their position. If you think about how, I mean, the family operates, and in terms of heteronormativity and so on. I mean, even there's that double-edged thing, isn't there, about LGBT rights, trans rights, and so on, which is, we fight for the rights, but actually, in many cases, those rights are about fitting in, assimilating to a system of heteronormativity, which if you're kind of a radical or a revolutionary, is kind of not what we're really after at all, is it? We want a completely, well, I do anyway, want a completely different sort of society. So I think, I mean, I get, you can get very frustrated, I think, with working class Tories. I'm from the north. I live in Wakefield, Leeds, Wakefield and Leeds and stuff. And, there's all this stuff about the Red Wall collapsing and people, voting Brexit for kind of allegedly racist reasons. But actually, it's a bit more difficult to disentangle than something kind of straightforward and simplistic like that. People kicked back and they kick back, but the real problem is where's the ideology coming from? That we all have to kind of fight through and face. And I'm sure I don't know about you. I mean, I don't come from a socialist family. My mother was a kind of working class liberal. My father was almost certainly, although he never discussed what he voted, was a Tory. Although he came from a, fairly, he was a draftsman engineer, so he didn't own a company or anything like that. But it took me a long time to kind of break, from the ideas of the family, the ideas that were wrapped up in imperialism. I spent years as a air training cadet in a combined cadet force. I mean, 5 years, 7 years I was in that, singing the national anthem and all that we had to do, and parading about and drilling and marching and whatever. And I was never okay with it, but I didn't understand why. And it took me a long time, not really till I came across organised socialists and I was able to discuss those things, did I kind of break from them. So I think we all have to be quite careful about not pointing the finger at folk and saying, well, why did people vote this way? And, I'm sorry to say, I think it's a lack of leadership and resistance from Labour, and it's a lack of leadership and resistance from most of our trade union leaders as well. If you look at the levels of strikes and resistance over the past years, very, very low, historically really low in this country. And that's provided the space for some people on the left actually to see, trans people as a problem, so-called undermining women's rights, for instance, rather than seeing who the real enemy is, which is the Tories and who they represent, which is, essentially the rich and powerful. I'm in danger of rambling. You should shut me up, Vonni.
It's absolutely fine. I'm a very hands-off chair. So, I mean, it, kind of the next thing that I had. Oh, Keyne, if you want to go, yeah.
One thing I wanted to jump on there, which I thought was really interesting. I think there is apologies, I'm having a complete brain blank. I was too distracted by having interrupted in the first place. Oh, no, it's gone again.
Okay, I'll come back to you. It's fine. I'll just jump in again. Okay, so I was thinking, all of this is leading to this moral panic, and Laura's just touched on it, which is what's driving a lot of hate. This alleged conflict between women's rights and trans rights, and that moral panic, which I know even in our union, Kacey, I'm quite prepared to say it, even in our union, is creating havoc by the views of a minority. I think we are winning. I think we've got a lot of allies, a lot more allies now than we did before. But I think, as evidenced by some conference motions that we managed to get past, but it is there. And much as I would love to ignore it, it is there. And I don't know, has anyone got anything to say about it? Because I know what I think, but I think the world knows what I think. But it's not my life. It's not my, it's not my voice to have. It's, so does anyone have anything to say about this ridiculousness, which is how I see it, that's going on?
I think it's interesting to think about what transphobia does for people on the left. And I think a lot of what it is doing at the moment is enabling liberal, progressive, centre-left-ish sort of people to be able to espouse socialist policies without being associated with the media construction of the loony left, which dates back to the London GRA days, or rather, whatever the body was called back then. The LA. I'm getting my issues mixed up. It's worth, I think, wondering what transphobia, or why trans people are so threatening to people, why people feel so threatened by transness and by the society, the viewpoint that they think we represent, which is very different from the viewpoint that any individual of us might be bringing to the party. And there's a perception, I think, that we are the straw that will break the camel's back of this heteronormativity and patriarchy. It's worth remembering that for a large number of people, we've been in a they've been fighting to return to the 1930s from the 1950s, and they've been trying to return to the 1950s since the 1960s. And that's always been the case, and they have always wanted to uphold this very rigid view of how people should relate to each other, and this has always been completely fundamental to capitalism. So it's deeply threatening, I think, both to people for those reasons of being failing to be able to imagine a society in which trans people exist and thrive and are respected that is compatible with the power that we have at the moment. In some ways, I think there's a subconscious recognition of that driving some of this.
Who would like to jump in now? Has anyone else got anything to say around that?
I'm happy to
go on, Kacey.
I think it is that the narratives are just so controlled that's the problem. All of the media are transphobic now, and that's kind of quite often been the way for a lot of kind of marginalized people, is that you would get most of the media would be kind of following that kind of spin and targeting the marginalized people. But you would generally have some newspapers that wouldn't, like The Guardian, for example, might be a paper where you could get the more, I don't know, I don't want to say the word liberal voices, because again, like there's so many liberal and socialist people who are transphobic and are kind of key agitators in the kind of the panic and the hatred. But that's the problem, is that there aren't actually that many trans and non-binary people. There's more and more, which is amazing, and they're more visible, which is also amazing, and it's going to change. And it's going to change, like there's going to be the trans tipping point hasn't happened. The trans tipping point is going to take place in about 10 or 15 years, when all of the kids who are kind of able to name their transness and non-binariness now, when they become adults and they are visible and they are around, and the generation of kids who've grown up with them, that's when the actual transgender tipping point is going to take place. But there's people, when people know trans and non-binary people, it's kind of like I said before, they realise that we're just the same as everybody else. My being trans is not the most interesting thing about me, but it's all I seem to talk about these days, and it's definitely all I think about, and that's in a negative way. Because I post on my Facebook today that I'm finding it really fucking difficult to be transgender at the moment. And it's not about my friends. It's not about the people I love. It's about what it feels like to exist at the moment, when, the paper that I like, the news that I watch, things like BBC and, that I would trust, are still doing ridiculous things. The arguments don't hold up. They just literally don't hold up. That, and it just, in every element of what they go on about, nothing holds up. There's a gender critical book just been released with like 4 pages of references for a whole huge book that, and they're really flimsy. There's not anything kind of properly academic or scientific in the references. It's just rubbish that's so easily debunked. And it's reviewed in The Guardian as being like a weighty tome. Like, it's not a weighty tome. It's full of rubbish. They propagate anti-Semitic tropes about, dangerous cabals of people transing people and doing it from drugs, like estrogen tablets are one of the cheapest medicines around. They weren't invented for trans people. They're just, nearly all of the medications for trans people weren't invented for trans people. They just realized that they had different uses. Puberty blockers for trans kids weren't invented for trans kids. They just realized that they could use them. And so that they were never invented. These medicines were never researched and created for trans people. God forbid that would ever happen. Where would we be if trans people were actually having medications created for them? But all of the arguments fall away and don't stand up to any scrutiny. However, there's not enough trans people to be making the points. And if all of the editors and the journalists are not hearing those arguments and are doing, are they stupid? Are they doing it on purpose? Are they being like told what to write? Like, any of these things could be true, and that's what people are going to see and hear. And then there's too many people who allow these conversations to just be said. I've got so many friends again. I don't have many anymore actually, but I've got so many people that I know. Like, I can go to a Facebook page, like in my local area, Coventry, for transphobes. Like, I'm not going to call them TERFs. I'm not going to call them gender critical. They're transphobes. That's what they are. And there's a transphobes group for Coventry. Supposedly it's for women's rights. The first 2 points on there are both about trans women. Sorry, like, is that really the most pressing issues for women? No, it isn't. There's all kinds of issues for women that they don't, that go down their list. But I can see on that group, I've got like so many friends of mine are connected to people who like that group. Like, why? What do the people not realise? And I don't know if that's the case. Like, are the cis people that I know just don't really pay attention to what people are looking at and liking and posting or reposting? Or is it that they don't really care, that they don't mind having somebody who's transphobic as their friend? But if they had a racist who was their friend, they'd make like the specials, AKA, and that would be the time for the friendship to end, and they'd boot them out the door. And rightly so. If we had, I would say actually, if we had an ableist friend, but actually that's like also similar. And sadly, we do have racism that we tolerate. But the difference is with transphobia and the ableism and the racism is actually that the transphobia is overt and very clear and out there, and the racism that we tolerate in our friends is the kind of, the structural kind that, they perhaps might not realise precisely. Yeah, I feel like a right soapbox moment there.
It was a fantastic soapbox moment, Kacey, and the love you're getting from the comments is just amazing. So thank you to all the viewers. I know that most of the Socialist think tank viewers and members are all fantastic allies, and they just need to, and kind of, we just need to know how to be better allies. That's what we need. You know, we need that, and you know, we need your help in working that out. So yeah, you're getting loads of love.
Can I come in?
Of course you can, Laura.
Yeah, I do. I agree with all of that. What Kacey said, and I mean, Kacey's angry clearly, and I think all of us are angry because we are facing what is for many people, it's damaging and it is life-threatening for trans people and for people considering, not necessarily even if they're considering transition, but just to be who they are. It makes it less likely that they'll come out. So and it is so dangerous. I think what we're after is kind of it's solidarity, isn't it? It's people taking the time and trouble who are not trans and not faced directly by the maliciousness and harassment and so on, to take a bit of time to kind of think about the issues and read stuff from, if you like, from our side that points out that there is no evidence at all, for example, that that trans women are a threat to women in single-sex spaces, in toilets, bathrooms, changing rooms, prison, or whatever. There's no evidence for this, And even if, I know I've said this many times, but in different platforms, but even if there was a case or two or whatever of trans women, attacking cisgender women, actually, we wouldn't endorse saying, oh, well, there you are then, that's the case for all trans women. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't say that because somebody who is black attacks somebody, that all blacks do that, would we? I mean, yet it seems to be okay for transphobic people to sort of circulate those sorts of arguments and expect other people to kind of soak them up. I do think that I think we're a tiny percentage, actually. I mean, it varies, who knows? But people talk about, in this country, it's a fraction of a percent who have actually transitioned, a fraction of 1%. Probably 1, maybe 2% of the population are, non-binary and trans of, some description. It's really, really small. It's not like, the proportion of women or black people or brown people or even disabled people, actually. And so there is a problem about getting voices heard, which the transphobes never have a problem with, because they get their voices amplified by the press. I mean, what did Kathleen Stock do, who got an OBE at the beginning of the year? Kathleen Stock, she's just written, I don't know if you were referring to Kathleen Stock's book. No, probably not.
Helen Joyce's one I was referring to.
Ah, right, yeah. Well, I don't know if you've seen Kathleen Stock's. It's just as pernicious. Actually, I've read it. It is just as pernicious and nasty as the more crude stuff that comes out. But she used her acceptance speech, for having been awarded an OBE, I think it was, in the New Year's Honours, to make a transphobic speech. She used that platform. She felt that was okay to do that, and she, others of them are using their platforms in the media to do the same thing, and it is disappointing. It's disappointing. I mean, personally, politically, I find it disappointing that some people I have known personally on the left are taking either equivocal positions or hostile positions, which is not to say, by the way, that, I mean, to be honest, there are sections of the left in this country and internationally which have traditionally taken really bad positions on questions of oppression, whether it's women's oppression or anti-racism, or particularly around sexual issues, particularly around issues of sexual orientation. They've not seen it as it's not part of the class struggle. It's not part of the economic, it's not about wages and conditions and so on. I mean, it is all about those things. As a matter of fact, it's about jobs and marginalized communities not being able to get jobs, or not being open to get those jobs in certain sectors, or getting lower pay. It's all about those things. But there's a kind of tradition in kind of Stalinist and orthodox left politics which has taken that position, and it's not new amongst radical feminists either. I mean, they were excluding trans women, or attempting to exclude them, in the 1970s, 50 years ago. So it's not new, but it is disappointing when people you've known come out of this stuff, or won't take a stand against transphobia, and won't do a basic socialist thing, which is to stand in solidarity with a marginalized and oppressed group of people, which trans people manifestly are. That's what I find. And they enable these horrible ideological attacks from the right, which are not just about trans people. Transphobia fits in really well, actually, with attacks on multiculturalism, anti-Semitism, as Kacey said. There are people, there are folk who are posting really dodgy anti-Semitic tropes, which are not being called out by gender-critical people or transphobic people, because they don't want to alienate somebody who's saying the same thing as them. And they're all enabling, essentially, very right-wing arguments about gender ideology and transgender ideology and the transgender lobby, and we're all well financed, and we're all grooming young people, da-di-da-di-da. And yet, as Kacey quite rightly said, somebody can go to their GP and get a prescription for HRT, which is the same thing as the hormones, cross-sex hormones, which trans people have to get a bloody diagnosis for, and an approval from GPs and psychiatrists for. People can go and order and pay for bodily changing, body altering, procedures, which again, we aren't able to do, because we have to go through all sorts of gatekeepers, and it's bizarre. A final thing I'll just say is that actually, I think we're all I think everybody's alienated in all sorts of ways, and I think being brought up in a system that values gender binary and heteronormativity and so on is alienating for cisgender people as well, and for straight people as well as gay people, even though it's trans people and and gay people bear the brunt of that. But we're all constrained in the society in which we live in, because it makes us all kind of unhappy and alienated in one form or another. And it's about how do we change the society to get rid of that, get rid of that alienation.
And just really quick to join on that, like if there is trans equality, if we win that fight for trans equality, every single person in the country is going to win by that victory. When trans people and non-binary people have parity and have kind of acceptance in the world, everybody wins, every single one of us.
I think it's important perhaps to say what we mean, because we use the term moral panic a lot in this show, which it's I think an incredibly useful term to know, to understand. I think it's really important to realize that this is not the first moral panic of this kind. It's not going to be the last. It's not even the only one which is currently happening of its kind. One of my favorite podcasts is a show called You're Wrong About, which is basically a dissection of moral panics through the ages. And they always follow the same pattern. It's the same structure. You find a marginalized community, you make up a way in which they are a problem, speculative potential, fear associated with them. You develop enough content in this that it starts to look vaguely reasonable to anyone who looks at it without much criticality, and especially that it's targeted when at people who exist very differently to most people and might require a bit of understanding to be able to fit them into your worldview, unless you're wonderful kind of person who just accepts people without worrying how they fit into their own personal worldview. I wish there were more people like that. I think it's clear that is very much what's happening, but it's not just about trans people either. This moral panic is being used as direct cover in the same way that previous ones had, with very different policy goals, undermining abortion access is absolutely a key goal of the anti-trans group. It's worth noting at this point that I would refer to TERFs, the radical feminists of it. They're not the core of the movement. They are the camouflage. They are the netting over it, trying to disguise a much more normal reactionary backlash from much more usual suspects. It's just words that they get to use, because when you're doing a moral panic, the first thing to do is use incredibly emotive things and always talk about protecting children. Usually, if you can portray the other people as predators of children, whether they are Jewish, whether they are Catholic, whether they are Black, the same pattern always plays out. Vulnerable, our children are vulnerable to them. Our legacy is vulnerable to them. Our whiteness is vulnerable to them. Our patriarchy is vulnerable to them. I think that is a really important thing to understand the dynamics of, and especially in the context of the UK, where we have a media institution, a media system, media ecosystem, which I would describe as the perfect engine for transphobia. There's a reason this is so much worse in the UK than everywhere else. There's a reason that the UK gets, again, I would say erroneously, referred to as TERF Island, that our court cases are being cited in the horrific bills that are proliferating in the United States that have already had so much devastating impact. I think it's important to be conscious of how much of the fault of our media ecosystem this is, as a positive feedback loop which takes in these conspiracy theories, spins them, and makes money off of just continually amplifying them. It's worth considering, like, why that's happened, and it's, I think, as well a fact that it's declining revenues, and they try trying to adjust to digital media, and they can't. There is huge amounts of panic. There is huge concerns about investments. There's reliance on creating outrage by clicks, and there is a complete erosion of moral norms around journalism, which is horrific. There are obviously also in the UK media very small, culturally cliquey groups of editors, same and senior columnists as well. It's a not insignificant theory that a huge amount of this, the reason this is concentrated in the UK is because of how many transphobic Guardian writers went to the Ladies' Pond in Hampstead when it became an issue there in 2014-ish. Who knows? But then we've also got the habit of people like the BBC to take an approach to balance, which is just both sides of them, and still sees them propagating climate denial in the year 2021, as if that were somehow a reasonable position to still be taking in the name of balance. On the top of it all, transness fits into a family of moral panics, which we're seeing in the UK and more globally. Cancel culture, academic freedom, critical race theory, and Black Lives Matter. All of these are connected in the way in which they're being delegitimized. The perspective from inside the trans community is very interesting. We see almost an obsessive focus on us for reasons that we can't comprehend, so detached from reality. And I think it puts us in this sort of very defensive position. I want to start moving more, I guess, towards what does not even our liberation look like, to be honest. That will be a challenge for weeks from now, months from now, years from now. I think at the moment it's harm reduction during this moral panic, because it won't be forever. They find new targets, and they always will. But if we also don't find a way to A, survive this one, and B, deconstruct the system of media and politics and power, which allows this diversionary tactic to keep going, well, it won't matter, because then we won't have dealt with the climate crisis because we will have been too busy with the latest moral panic instead. These are the way in which power protects itself, and we need to really get under the skin and the bones and the mechanics of it to deconstruct it. The thing we have now that we've never had before is social media and a growing awareness of how this actually works. And I think that's such a key thing for everyone to keep pushing on, because, well, one of the key things, isn't it? Sorry, my own little soapbox moment.
Oh, no, that's absolutely fine. And really, really interesting. And one thing that I want to think about now, because I know that we've only got an hour tonight, and I'm saying that to the viewers, I know you guys, because I know that Keyne has to get off somewhere else, is kind of what things could we campaign for? What positive campaigns can we use to, because a lot of people, and I've found this, and Kacey will tell me if I'm wrong, is that you can change hearts and minds of the people who don't really understand the issues. So you can change hearts and minds. And you can, you know, people who have heard all of these arguments from the transphobes, as Kacey's calling them, you can have chats to those people. I used to work, before I was a teacher, I used to deliver training for a local domestic abuse charity. And I used to deliver training around LGBT plus same-sex and like all the domestic violence issues around that. So I know the history and I know that, you know what I mean? So I've come from that background. People think I'm a primary teacher and they talk to me like I know nothing about it, but I did have a life before I was a primary teacher. But kind of like, what positive things can we use? What campaigns can we do? We're very good at campaigning. What can we do? What can we campaign for that would actively help and be a positive impact, create a positive impact? That's kind of where I'm thinking.
Quickly. I think one of the most important things to remember is that very little of the information about what's currently happening to the trans community is in the public domain, or at least not in reliable form. One thing we've seen is a complete breakdown in the media's ability to actually communicate what is happening to trans people in ways which enable the movement and the community to respond. So firstly, it's really be careful where you're getting information from and think about it carefully. And the second reason I want to bring that up is because the very obvious one is healthcare, but you might not know how obvious and how bad that situation is unless you're actually inside it and unless you're actually collecting information about it. And I want to give a little example of this. Earlier this year, UK ended provision of phalloplasty surgery. The single provider of it in the entire healthcare system, in the entire UK of the UK, lost its tender. They intend to reapply, so they say, we have no idea really what's going on. It's thought that the waiting list is still in place, but at no point were any of the people communicated with. And in the meantime, lost access, lost places, and people are scared to speak out of it for risk of having their healthcare targeted, their healthcare access revoked because they spoke out about it. This kind of thing is deeply everywhere in a deep emergency, and the kind of thing which would be the subject of national campaigns which would tell people how to help and how to get involved if it weren't for the fact that it's about trans people. There is always something going on. I am asked a lot, like, what should we do? There are a lot of, I see a lot of trans people on social media who are a bit scared and not sure how to help. And I think joining with existing groups, working locally, work in your own institutions and your unions where there are issues, and your workplaces where there might be issues, anywhere such as that. And also remember that it's not all about the people who hate us. One of the most important forms of activism is supporting other trans people. And it's, in fact, going where the energy is and talking to people who are already a bit on your side, getting them really on your side, and helping them to actually do that. And the last thing is stay away from social media and all the horrible things. This defensive posture is really unhealthy for the trans community. I think we are constantly bombarding ourselves with hate rhetoric and abuse rhetoric directly into our brains in order to stay informed. And I don't think that we should have to do that if there were more robust information systems, if we could rely on the media. At the moment, people feel like they do have to. They absolutely not. It's not useful. I imagine a better world and fight for that. Don't pay attention to what they are saying, honestly. I think the model we need right now is the lesbian Avengers, completely unashamed. Their motto was "We recruit," and I think that is the kind of owning what's happening to us that we need to see.
I think that's a very positive way to look at it. And I have about 5 toaster ovens, so I totally get it. Laura, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just coming in to back up what Kane was saying, really, particularly about the last point about social media, because it is really frustrating and quite, I think, emotionally damaging to believe as a trans, non-binary, whatever person that you can take on all the crap that you come across. I mean, I do take on some stuff, but I won't take on most of the stuff I see, because it just leads you down a rabbit hole if you're not careful. And I think trans people in general are quite right to say, look, we're not going to debate these issues. I mean, we wouldn't debate somebody who makes racist comments or anti-Semitic comments. We'd say, you're a racist. I'm going to unfriend you. I've done it today, actually, with somebody. I've unfriended them because they've made an anti-Semitic comment. I'm not going to debate that with them, the same as I'm not going to debate my right to exist or the right of trans people to be, and to have a life. I make just a couple of other very quick points, really. I do agree with you, Vonni, that sometimes it is possible to win arguments and win people over. I saw something on social media, I think it was Twitter, a Canadian, somebody else, other people might have seen it, but a Canadian feminist who had actually founded a transphobic group, who had argued with folk and been argued with and come across more information, and just posted a tweet saying, I've changed my mind. I've realized that I don't agree with what I was saying a year ago, and all I can say is I'm sorry for the damage that I've caused. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen on a widespread level, but actually it is possible, for that to happen. I think there are some grounds for optimism. My impression is that young people, by and large, have a different approach to and a different sensibility towards gender fluidity, different gender expressions and sexuality than certainly people of my generation, and that most of the kind of absolute rubbish and so on is coming. I hesitate to, I don't want to just introduce, an age thing, but I do think it's coming very often from people in particular kind of age and social milieu, the kind of often, Kacey will know this, it's coming from people in the kind of lower levels of, the trade union bureaucracy who are of a certain age, second wave feminist sort of age from the 70s and 80s and so on, rather than from young people. I know there are exceptions, but, and if you look at the surveys, actually, most people are not transphobic. Most people are fairly open-minded, and so I think we have to kind of amplify that and minimize the kind of negative stuff. And I think the way we do that, I'm sure all of us here in various ways are actually engaged in sort of trying to raise awareness. I kind of go into universities with some organizations, and for social work training, I do sessions on trans and non-binary and so on, just to kind of say to people, look, if you don't know a trans person now, you will do. You will have clients, you will have work colleagues, you need to be aware of this kind of these arguments and this stuff that's coming up. So I think the awareness stuff, and I think actually things like Reclaim Pride Today is brilliant, because Pride actually should be about protesting and solidarity and not just about having a good time. I'm all for having a good time, but actually, come on, look at the state of things. Things have gone backwards in all sorts of parts of the world, in the US, in Hungary, in Poland, in Russia, parts of Africa, parts of the Far East, and we should be giving solidarity to those people who are organising and struggling, in those countries. I think some places have started trans prides, haven't they? We've got one in Leeds. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to have a trans pride physically for 2 years now. But when we can and when we do, it's much angrier and younger and more colourful and militant, than the pride in Leeds is. I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but that's my impression. Some of us organised in Leeds. We organised a protest over the GRA consultation, and that was in the middle of the lockdown. It had to always socially distance and everything. But we had 100 people turn up, over 100 we had an open mic, really moving stuff. That people were saying, and it gave people a sense of collectivity, and potential to kind of resist. And obviously in our trade unions, and I know. It's probably your union, Vonni and Kacey, is probably the worst, I suspect, because all the issues about safeguarding and so on, alleged safeguarding issues come up. But I think it's being dealt with by good people in the union. And I do think what you said, Vonni, is right. I think you are winning. It's coming up in other unions as well, and I think we have to be on our guard to take it on there. And overall, I think we've also got to be part of the general building a general fight back, because the truth of it is, I'll finish kind of on this really, but the truth of it is that if you're stood in a meeting or on a picket line with somebody, you don't start with arguing about what do they think about trans rights or what do they think about whatever. You start with understanding what you're doing there, who the enemy is, why you're standing shoulder to shoulder with them, and it kind of it minimises the space available to introduce those destructive kind of differences that people might think exist, and it, you know, it makes it more likely that you understand that you've got a common enemy, and that a victory for one group is also a victory for other groups.
Yeah, definitely. It's part of that. To me, it's all part of that keeping us divided. I'm going to bring Kacey in because I know she's got something to say, but it's about, we need to build across as well. We all need to support each other, and that's how we get the numbers, and that's how we get the support, and that's how we change things. Yeah, I'm just going to go to Kacey, and then I'm going to go to Kane because I know we're running out of time. You're on mute, Kacey.
Oh, do you know what? I literally just unmuted myself, not muted. I must have been on non-mute, idiot. I think, yes, like you can win people round, like with discussion. Like I have done it. You know, I had somebody from one of the union pages message me, and it took about 90 texts, Facebook messages between the two of us, where she was worried about something, and I said, well, it's more like this, but we had like a long to and fro. We're Facebook friends now. The one thing that she couldn't get her head around was the word cis. I was like, well, fine, if that's the only thing that you don't want to be known as cis, then we'll leave it there for now. I don't know how they feel about it now, but we're Facebook friends now, and you know, so it can be done. But actually, 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work. You know, you can kind of spend so much energy and time going through trying to present arguments to people, and they don't listen. And it is draining. Like, it is draining for trans and non-binary people to do that, because, you know, you're opening your Facebook feed and you're seeing stuff and it hurts you. But also social media is like a space of solidarity and kind of strength and support. So it's a double-edged thing. Like, it's support and it's toxic at the same time. And I think, you know, how do we win those debates? You know, I think we just win the debates by sharing the positivity, I guess, by being visible, by being out there, by, you know, things like disclosure, I think is amazing. You know, when people watch that and then we think, well, where does the transphobia come from? It's so clear. Like, you know, I'm sure, like, it's as if trans people don't have their own transphobia. I was incredibly transphobic. That's why it took me years and years and years to come out. Like, it wasn't that I was just magically trans, you know, and then like somebody waved a wand over me and then all of a sudden I was like, I'm a woman now. You know, it doesn't happen like that. You fight it for like 35, 40 years before you can own it in yourself. And like, you know, that's how hard it is. You can't make somebody not trans, and you can't make somebody trans. You can't turn a cis kid into a trans kid. I think, you know, I watched a Storyville documentary last night called Petite Fille, I think, like Little Girl in French. And it's a French documentary film about a little trans kid. I don't know my feelings about it. I thought it might be a little bit invasive. I don't know who made it, but actually it was so moving and sad, actually, to see this little girl who, from the age that she was 2.5, like her parents couldn't even remember that she had always insisted she was a girl. Like, there was no, you know, that's just who she is. And her parents didn't, you know, they didn't plan that. They didn't trans her. You know, if anything, they would have like wanted her to be normal, you know, but that's not, you can't do that. But seeing that kind of transphobia with her, and, you know, going to a ballet lesson that she went to as a boy, and, you know, it was absolutely, I don't want to plot spoil it, I suppose I have to now, but she wasn't allowed at the end. After she transitioned, she wasn't allowed to carry on in her ballet class, because the ballet teacher said no and pushed her out the door crying in front of the other parents. You didn't see that on the film, but that was recounted. And seeing how her school, you know, the head teacher at the school refused to let her socially transition, and seeing, like, it's a very intimate film and documentary, and you see that child so close, like with her parents and her brothers and sisters. She's got 2 brothers, you know, a sister who doesn't particularly gender conforming, you know, she's not, her sister's not like a really dolly girly girl or anything like that. They're just a kind of normal family of normal people. And, you know, I think that's the kind of, where's the media attention for that film? You know, where it wasn't reviewed barely in any of the newspapers. Like, I only found it by mistake, and I thought, oh, is this one of the old ones again? And I think, it is about trans kids. Like, you know, any teacher probably will have a trans or non-binary kid in their class. You know, are they stereotypes? No, they're not. They're just not. They're, you know, meet one trans kid, you've met one trans kid. They're all completely different. They're not stereotypes. They're not gender stereotype, you know, the way they present or conform. And that's what we do, really. You know, just kind of let people see that trans people, and trans kids particularly, are just normal people. And, you know, that I think is where we need to fight, is really for trans and non-binary children, because I think it's absolutely shocking and appalling. I've got a friend who's writing a PhD. They've recently come out as non-binary, so I just misgendered them. Their child, you know, they've supported their child through years, and now they're doing a PhD, and their research is absolutely appalling. The kind of stuff that goes on at the Tavistock Clinic, you know, they've interviewed lots of parents of trans and non-binary kids, and the kind of questions that they've been put through by the clinicians at the Tavistock is just outrageous and disgusting. And, you know, the kind of the treatment that they've had at school, that the parents have kind of fed back for their research. Like these are the stories that just won't get picked up. But this is the reality. You know, if anybody knows a trans kid, like I said, you don't. The kind of the myth is that parents are just transing their kids. That's not the reality. You know, 9 times out of 10 in my experience of parents of trans kids, the parents aren't accepting of their kid at first. They don't want their kid to be trans because they're transphobic. You know, even inside, you know, they might be saying, "Oh, no, I don't mind trans people," but it's like, but not my child. You know, that's the kind of gut reaction that most parents have when a kid says they're trans. You know, they try for them not to be. So yeah, sorry, I've got a bit emotional there, but yeah, I think that's when people see young trans people just being themselves and kind of being free to kind of just express themselves, not worrying about whether they're going to, you know, what if they turn around tomorrow and say that they're not trans anymore? Then it's like, so what? It doesn't matter. There's no consequences to it. But yeah, sorry.
Well, don't apologise, Kacey, really don't. No, I've done enough work in the union with you, and I remember last year when you introduced me to the work of Kashenga, and I was like, that was just so interesting when we were organising that decolonisation of gender stuff. It was just really, really interesting. I know Kane put their hand up, and I know we've gone totally over your time, Kane. I'm so sorry, but it's so interesting.
Kacey, you just covered a lot of the things that I wanted to say anyway. I think that's brilliant. But I just wanted to pick up very briefly on the generational aspect you're talking about, because I think there's something worth thinking about what and why that seems to be happening. And what I see, just me, I see a generation who are fucked, economically fucked, will never own property, the economy is much worse, lifetime earnings are much worse, minimum wage is much lower, real-time earning, shit, gig economy exploding, workplace rights being revoked. Young people, I think, understand that. They understand the systemic racism which is going on. They understand the systemic transphobia, for not broadly, but increasingly, and I think a large part of that is social media. It has enabled stories to be heard which would not have been otherwise heard. And I think that there is a norm arising of believe marginalized people, listen to marginalized voices, take that as your default rather than take your default from what everyone else is telling you. And I think that that is a really massive shift that we need to capitalize on. The problem, as I see it, is you already said the trans community is very small, and everywhere, in fact, that is true. That's always going to be true. So I think something that's really important to remember is that we talk about intersectionality a lot with a slight assumption of being on the receiving end. I think it's really important to also make sure that as trans people, we are advocating for abortion rights. We are advocating to end systemic racism. We are advocating to deal with climate change. Because that is the other key ticking clock, which I think has changed a lot of people's perspectives. I expect to be alive for collapse of our world, quite frankly. That is fact. And anything which doesn't account for that and have a solution for that is not worth my time politically. And I think that that little ticking clock in the back of society that realize that all of this is starting to eat itself, and it's starting to feel the consequences of eating itself, and it's going to keep sowing and it's going to keep reaping until it completely eats itself unless someone does something. And that's something something has got to be a lot. It's got to be justice, it's got to be climate, it's got to be everything, it's got to be everything. And the who has got to be kind of everything. And leave my remarks there.
Does anyone have anything to say as a kind of closing remark? I'm just blown away. I've learned so much just from listening to you guys. It's just nice to hear real voices. And I know that it's been so, we've had some lovely comments. You know, I do what, you know, I'm normally there watching the comments and kind of making comments and things like that. And I know it's overwhelmingly positive whatever we do. But yeah, so thank you so much. Does anyone have anything that they would like to add?
I think if just to add one thing, because there was questions about why do trans women get a lot of the brunt, and I think and whether or, you know, and is it misogyny? And I think like it's a lot of misogyny. But again, like actually the problem with the way that trans men are treated is they're just invisibilized. they're just erased, and you know they've always been around, but like there's far more stories and things like that about trans women and kind of figures in the past, and kind of, you know, I don't know why necessarily that is, but I think in terms of the misogyny though, like with trans men, it becomes about erasing lesbians, and it kind of becomes another sort of form of misogyny, because it you know, it's as though like a gay man, I mean not that necessarily gay men transition to become trans women, but you know, gay men who would transition, like, oh yeah, that's fine. But like a gay woman who is then saying, actually, I'm kind of realizing that I'm not a gay woman, I'm a trans man, then it's like, no, you don't know your mind. So it's again another kind of misogyny, really. And I think, you know, it doesn't help. The hidden side of trans men hasn't helped, because trans women are made hyper visible, and they're made, if you watch Disclosure again, that kind of hyper visibility, we can understand that. Like trans women are kind of sexualized in like uncomfortable ways, which leads to kind of massive amounts of sexual violence again against them disproportionately, particularly with black trans women. That's those levels are atrocious, because then you kind of mix in with the intersectionality, all of the kind of the poverty and the kind of opportunities, and those kind of things come into play as well. But with trans men, they don't have that. But you know, and again, it's just not helped. That's just not helped the kind of the case for trans men, because, and perhaps again, because trans men can kind of blend in a lot easier. You know, again, they're sort of less visible, because they're less visible. There's a visibility with trans women that you can't avoid. You know, it's harder to transition from male to female than it is from female to male. Like a couple of years of testosterone, and that's like, you know, you can be stealth, as a phrase, which I find a very difficult word. You know, like I don't kind of feel like I ever want to be stealth, but that was used to be my dream, that I could just disappear and just be like a normal woman, and nobody would ever know my terrible, shameful secret. You know, but actually that's not necessarily so easy for trans women to do, but it is possible for trans men to do. So, you know, so I think it's absolutely misogyny that trans women get a lot of it, like, because again, it's intersections, isn't it? It's like trans women are less women than cis women, and white trans women, black trans women are worse and kind of push down the hierarchy than white trans women. And that's kind of how it goes. Like people kind of seem to want to push down and kick down, which is sad, really.
That's very, very true. I think it's worth noting the extent to which trans men are on the receiving end of misogyny as a result of how people see them, the way in which they are infantilized, being incredibly related to that.
Laura, you've got about 10 seconds. I'm aware Keyne's put in the chat, in our chat, actually. They do need to go.
I do agree with that. I think there's a particular kind of trans misogyny directed at trans excuse me, at trans women, which is all about, it is about the whole kind of misogynistic feminization or feminizing of men, and the outrage that some people feel about why would some men want to do that, to feminize themselves as trans women, as the transphobes see it. And that, I think, is reflected in the truly horrific ways in which some assaults are carried out, and the things that are said as well. But some assaults and murders are carried out of trans women, which are particularly, really quite just gross. And it's kind of this outrage that why would you want to cross that boundary, as they see it. So I agree with what both Keyne and Kacey have kind of said as well.
Oh, thank you.
I think the point we're driving towards is that now is no longer the time for compromise.
No, I think so.
I agree with that, absolutely.
Transgender resistance.
Yes.
I love that. Thank you so much for coming on and just talking and just talking to our viewers and talking to me. I just feel so privileged, and thank you so much. And I think
it's not like being in the pub again. Honestly, I've needed it.
Well, hopefully we will all meet up one day in a pub. Kacey and I are aiming for it. Okay, well, thank you so much, because I know you have to go, Kane. Paul, we're going to have to wrap up now. You're the technical man and know how to press buttons and stuff.
Thank you, everybody.
And don't forget to join Socialist.